we had the opportunity to understand difference, and we had the opportunity to gain empathy. And really, Mr. Rocco's classroom served really as an understanding of what the challenges of America were then and America are now. How can we take very distinct individuals who come from different places, who have different backgrounds, who have different worldviews, and make them come together for the benefit of everyone? And Mr. Rocco was able to do this effectively, again, because as I said, she taught each of us, right, to respect our collective humanity, to respect our differences, and to respect and understand the importance of empathy. And with this understanding, our classroom became something that you really don't see in schools nowadays. It became really a community where 25, 27 years later, when I see someone in the street in Mount Vernon, they're like, Andom, your mom's cooking, Eritrea, right? How many people in America know of Eritrea? Not that many, right? It's something that really we can remember. And this understanding has really served as the moral underpinning for my activism, my service, and my solidarity with others. I can always come back to that second grade experience. And I think the respect for collective humanity is also something that we see here in District 16 all the time. We saw it recently with the nationwide Jews Against ICE protests, right? We see it with in the individual groups, the rallies against the really unbelievably harsh, restrictive, and horrific abortion laws that state legislatures are passing. We've seen it in Pelham, in Yonkers, and all over Westchester, where people were protesting ICE going to courthouses. And so this ability to go across difference, to understand collective humanity, is something that each of us in Westchester, in District 16, in the Bronx, in New York City, we really understand as one of the most diverse places in all of America. I think these righteous examples of solidarity and collective action are something that here in District 16 is going to really empower us as we move forward. And it's certainly going to be something that's empowering in this race. But something that we also have to be very understanding of is that our capacity to organize, our capacity to effectuate change is going to be limited by really the scale of problems that we're facing. And I think that's something that we can all see. In Westchester, in plain view, the income inequality between cities is unbelievable. Where I'm from in Mount Vernon, if you look at Bronxville, the median prices on homes is roughly $2 million. All right? The average property tax on those homes is $50,000, which equals the median income in Mount Vernon. I'll repeat that. The average property tax in Bronxville equals the median income in Mount Vernon. This is side by side. We see this inequality. And this highlights, I think, also the affordable housing crisis that we're also seeing throughout America, but particularly acutely in Westchester and in New York City. Here in the Bronx, right, 30% of people spend 50% of their income on housing. They are severely rent burdened. When you're spending 50% of all of your income on housing, think about the types of choices that you have to make, right? Okay, I want to have a roof on my head. What's going to happen now with food, right? With medicine and prescription drugs. In Mount Vernon, the homelessness rates have skyrocketed over the last 10 years. They've tripled. This is an absurd stat. 10% of students in Mount Vernon, Peekskill, and Tarrytown are homeless. 10%. And so we have to think about, right, the scale of problems that we're facing when we have 10% of students that are homeless. Look, I'm a teacher, right? Think about the challenges to be able to educate someone when 10% of your classroom is not going to be able to have shelter that night. And so, you know, obviously race and class are linked with these problems that we're talking about. And we see how institutionalized racism is permeated through our institutions. I can speak, though, that there's also culturally an issue, culturally that these issues are also passed down somewhat latently. When I was 3 years old, I went to a YMYWHA in Mount Vernon. And my mom later on in my life told me that when I was 3, in this all-white Y, I came home to her and I said, "Mom, can I have milk? I want to put it on my body so I can look like the other students." And, you know, looking back, it's somewhat funny because I was able to have, again, a pretty diverse educational experience where, you know, again, I went to an integrated public school. I then went to Fieldston. So I definitely saw all different kinds of educational settings. But that story really just highlights the power of socialization here in America when it comes to white supremacy and racism. as a teacher, my first year, I read this book called Educating Esme. And Educating Esme is a really powerful story of a first-year teacher in the south side of Chicago. Now, first of all, this teacher is amazing just because she was able to keep a diary her first year of teaching, which is ridiculous because I don't want to wish anything bad upon any of you. First year teaching is the craziest thing anyone can do. But she kept a diary, and in this diary was one of the most poignant things which I still carry with me 10 years after I now started teaching. She gave her 5th grade students a project in which they needed to describe what they were dreaming the night before. So, I don't know what 5th graders dream about, but you can imagine some maybe fantasy stuff is happening or something supernatural. She said in her diary that there were multiple students that wrote, this is in 1999, mind you, multiple students that wrote that they were fearful of the Ku Klux Klan going to their doorstep on horseback. And just think of how crazy that is. 1999, on the south side of Chicago, you have 11-year-old students who are fearful that the Ku Klux Klan is going to show up at their doorstep. And, when I was a teacher in 2009, it shocked me then. And you know what? Maybe now, seeing what's happening, it's maybe not the most shocking thing to see how much our country has actually devolved into what were maybe fantastical fears, somewhat of a reality right now. And so I carried that story with me as an educator, and I was able to understand, not only from personal experience, not only from Educating Esme, that book, of what institutionalized racism was, but I really was able to see it as a teacher. I had an understanding going from Mount Vernon to Fieldston because these were very different academic environments. Not necessarily the quality of education, but in terms of the fact that Mount Vernon was a very integrated school, and at Fieldston I was one of maybe 10 people of color in the entire school. But teaching in the Bronx, it really just awoke me to how serious our educational crisis is. And it's really a crisis that unless you are teaching in an urban public school, the stats do not do justice, right, how severe this crisis is. So I was at a renewal school in the Bronx. It was called the School of Diplomacy. The school is actually now closed because it wasn't meeting a lot of the standards that are required of it. But this school had really all the trappings of an urban school that you would expect. Overcrowded, violent. There was really not one white person in the entire school besides people that were administration. And part of the problem with the school is just how that sort of environment lets people know about what the reality of America is. When you are 100% people of color in a school, and the only white people that you interact with are people who have vertical power over you, teachers, nurses, cops, right, and principals. It makes a huge problem for these students who are really confined to their bubble in where I was, the Williamsbridge section of the Bronx. But really the problem that we were facing was this institutional crisis of the school, which was funding, right? It was the ability for these students to achieve success in the school. And if you just want some personal stories, my mother will tell you how serious my first year teaching was and how crazy the experience was. But, we didn't even have any printer paper, right? I would go to school and there was no paper for anyone to use. This is in 2009. And so anytime I wanted to print something for my students, I had to put in a request, right, to the administration, and then they would, if they were able to, print it for me a week later. This is not how schools function, right? It's impossible to be able to react to the needs of the students when your copier is broken and you're not able to get paper. My house was littered with notebooks from all of the incident reports that I had to file because there was just so much violence in the school. In fact, my principal used to only show up to school twice a week. And the administrative neglect that was happening in this environment is, again, really something that only when you are there for 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, 180 days for the year, can you really understand the magnitude of what it's like when you're devoid of so many crucial resources that we take for granted, having gone to schools like Fieldston, Riverdale, or public schools that function. And so for those of us who taught in underfunded apartheid schools, we know the challenges facing urban education, and we know that it's a full-scale crisis. There's one student who I think in particular really highlights the crisis to me, and this is a student who I'll call C. I followed him from 7th through 8th grade, and in 8th grade, this student C I was a special education teacher, so I had to do this diagnostic assessment. In 7th grade, the diagnostic assessment was given to me. They said, oh, this student was on reading level. I was like, all right, he's on reading level. I was a special education teacher who taught most of the students with learning disabilities, so most of my students were not on grade level. In fact, most of the school in general, whether they were a student with disability or not, wasn't on grade level. Maybe only about 20% of the school was on grade level. Most of my students in the 8th grade were about 2nd or 3rd grade level. So they told me he was on grade level. I was like, wow, this is, really, really rare in my school. But I was like, all right, let me give him an assessment. I gave him an assessment, and I broke it down in terms of decoding, fluency, reading comprehension. And when I looked at the reading comprehension assessment, it was actually correct. I was like, yeah, he's on 8th grade level. But when I looked at the decoding assessment and the fluency assessment, he was on a kindergarten reading level. I was like, hey, how is this possible? How can a student who can't even have basic phonics and phonemic awareness be able to be on the 8th grade level? I gave the test again. This time I gave it with pseudo word decoding. So like words like zedge or any bod. That's sort of a word, I guess. But any word that's just a made up word, and you have to see if they're able to actually understand the phonemic awareness to break it down. He did it again, kindergarten reading level. I called C into my classroom. You only heard the beginning, you don't know what I'm doing. I called him into my classroom. I go, I just gave your assessment, and it's something remarkable. You're on an 8th grade level. Congratulations. But you have to work on one thing. Your pseudo word decoding is actually on a kindergarten level. And his eyes started tearing up a little bit. Because, imagine someone who's 13, 14 years old in a tough neighborhood in the Bronx. You're telling them that part of their academic identity is on a kindergarten level. Starts crying a little bit. I go, hold on, no. There's no reason for you to. There's no reason for you to be crying right now. What this shows you is how amazing your mind is, how resilient you are, and how strong you are. The fact that you are able to make sense of a world around you, text around you, without pictures, mind you, on grade level, when your pseudo word decoding is on a kindergarten level. C, you are one of the most amazing people I've ever met in my entire life. The rest of us have been dunking with trampolines, you've been dunking with 1 foot. And C sort of looked back at me, and he was like, yeah, Mr. Jeffberg, yeah. I was like, listen, we're going to work on this. We need to get this up, because at some point it's going to become something that's going to be very much a hindrance to you, more so than it already is. But you got this. You've already made it here. You got this. And this story by C, I think, highlights the resiliency of some communities which have been kept out of the fold for too long. I know it's one story, it's one student, but this is one of the most resilient people, and this is happening by the millions around this country. It's happening by the thousands around the Bronx. The story of C, though, is not all hope, though. C also represents the horror of the school-to-prison pipeline, because I got a call when C was 18 that he ended up actually running with the wrong crowd, and he had to go to prison for an attempted robbery for 3 years. And let me tell you about C, because if you saw C on TV, you would think TV might portray him as a hoodlum, a thug. This was one of the most compassionate people that you could ever meet. This was a student who I took to see the movie Bully, and then he would be outside on 219th Street when people would be in sort of gangs mobbing kids and picking on them. He'd tell them, no, we're going to be upstanders, we're not going to do this. He'd come to school the next day and be like, Mr. Jeffberg, I told people we're going to be upstanders today, we're going to be upstanders. And I told them they're not going to bully that kid. I was like, yeah, you're my man. And so to see how C could fall off the path lets us know that not only the school-to-prison pipeline is real, but we need to have much more holistic services than just community schools between K through 8, right? There are community interventions that are necessary, there are policy interventions that are necessary, and this is not going to happen unless you have people who understand the real challenges going on in these communities. It's not just lip service, it's not just showing up one day, which people should do. You should volunteer in these communities. This is about understanding the needs of what's going on there and being a representative of those people. I've highlighted a bit about how segregation and disinvestment are real problems in Westchester and the Bronx. And this is one of the reasons why I'm saying that we really need a transformative politics. We need to reimagine politics that's inclusive, that's representative, and that's going to bring people who have been marginalized and excluded into the process. Look, right now we've had a representative for District 16 for over 30 years, 16 terms, and he's done a lot of good progressive things. But we need someone who has bold vision. We need someone who's going to upend the status quo. We need someone who's going to make it so that someone like C, right, that reality is no longer possible in America. Because that happens to over 50% of males of color in New York City. 50% of males of color, right, only graduate from high school. 40% of students with disabilities, right, are the ones who are recommended for serious out-of-school suspensions, up to 180 days. The school system that we're seeing, the school system that I've been a part of, has been ableist, has been racist, and we've seen this in the disproportionate graduation rates and the disproportionate consequences that people are facing. And so when I'm talking about new representation in the district, I'm talking about having someone who is not only materially and morally connected to working people in the district, right, from Mount Vernon, from going to school in Riverdale, from teaching on the east parts of the Bronx, right, but I'm talking about someone who's not going to be beholden to special interests. I'm talking about someone who's not taking money from the military lobby, from real estate, from the healthcare industry. I'm talking about someone who is beholden to his people because I am of those people, and I've been working for those people for my career. Eliot Engel, look, he's taken millions of dollars from the industries which I've spoken about. He said in the past that the money that he gets does not impact his votes. Look, I mean, you could believe that. You can also just look at the record. And you can also consider, if someone is giving you money, what is their material interest in continuing to give you money unless you're serving their interest? And we see this not only with Eliot Engel, we see this with the Democratic Party as a whole, with the Republican Party, and politics in general. The corrosive influence of money in politics, right, undermines our democracy. It undermines the common humanity I spoke about before that I learned at Lincoln School. It devalues the voices and the lives of working people when we put profits over people and capital over communities. And so look, having been from Mount Vernon and having been teaching in public schools and teaching in low-income schools, I can tell you that the power of the people is rooted in values and priorities that reflect our common humanity, right? It's rooted in understanding that we must guarantee housing for all, that we must recognize, right, healthcare as a human right. We must guarantee federal jobs for all people at $15 pegged to inflation. We have to ensure Medicare for all so people don't have to make the unfortunate decision of do they pay for their prescription drugs or do they pay for their rent. We have to invest in clean energy and sustainable infrastructure that's been outlined in the Green New Deal. And we have to fully fund public education from K through 12. And of course also providing free public colleges. We have to secure rights and justice for people of color, for women, for workers, for immigrants, for LGBTQ people. And we can't make this something that's negotiable. Poll after poll shows that Americans want these things. It's not something that's right versus left. Progressive policies are what the majority of Americans want. It maybe has to do a little bit with framing, but when you ask people, everyone wants these things that we're speaking about. They might not just want them in the way that we ask them. So our duty is to frame these issues in the right way. It's to raise the consciousness of people, and it's to make sure that people understand that recognizing our common humanity is something that is imperative for Republicans, for Democrats, especially in Trumpian times. We've wasted trillions of dollars already on forever wars, on ICE, on endless prisons. Right now, recently, they're looking to build a new $11 billion couple of prisons in New York City that they were recently speaking about, and they were opening it up actually for public comment. But we've been spending billions of dollars on these things which are unnecessary, in addition to corporate welfare of every kind. Imagine if the $6 trillion that we've given to Iraq and to Afghanistan, even only a fraction of that had gone to Mount Vernon and to the part of the Bronx that I had taught in. What would our communities look like? How many lives would be saved? Not only of our soldiers, right, but of people like Curtis C. We don't know his last name. People like C, who unfortunately are not on the path that really they should be on. And so when we speak about Eliot Engel in this regard, his hawkish record is clear. He voted for Bush and Cheney's Iraq war, right? Engel is part of that. And there are many Democrats who are also a part of it. They need to own that. Because I was a senior at Fieldston, cutting school with the rest of the people to go down to Union Square to protest that war. It has nothing to do with age. It has to do with morality. And it also has to do with understanding that a certain record is being repeated over time, right? He voted against withdrawing U.S. troops from Afghanistan in 2011. Also in 2011, he voted for one of the harshest Iran sanctions that we could ever really imagine. And then, of course, in 2015, with Obama, he was one of the few Democrats who voted against the Iran nuclear deal. Now, however, he's speaking against Trump, saying that he's drumming up the beats of war. No, the beats of war have been drummed up since the mid-2000s with John Bolton. And Eliot Engel has been right there with him as a Democrat when really he shouldn't be there. We should not have any Democrat who's supporting these militaristic policies. He also has been historically one of the most reflexive supporters of the right-wing Israeli occupation and expansionist settlement activity. And this is one of the most problematic, actually, records of Eliot Engel's, particularly as we see really what's been happening between the Democratic Party and the Republican smears against Ilhan Omar. I just want to speak for a little bit about what Eliot Engel has done with reference to Israel since the Obama times. In 2016, there was a UN vote, UN sanction really, on Israeli settlements. And Obama took actually a rare step of saying that the U.S. was not going to veto this UN resolution. Eliot Engel went against a sitting Democratic president on the issue of settlements. Settlements. We're not talking about right to exist or BDS. We're talking about settlements. Something that unequivocally, right, without question, goes against international law. And really what we see when we see Eliot Engel with reference to Israel, when we see him with reference to the Iran nuclear deal, when we see him with reference to Saudi Arabia and Yemen, we see that Eliot Engel is actually in the bedfellows of Trump, of Bolsonaro, of Netanyahu, and of Orban. He's in the same bedfellows with people who are the most reactionary right-wing nationalists. But he's a Democrat. He's a Democrat that ostensibly supports Medicare for all, that ostensibly supports the Green New Deal, that ostensibly supports a lot of the policies that we believe in. But there's a disconnect. You can't call for racial justice when you're supporting Trump's unilateral move of the embassy to Jerusalem, which the majority of Jewish Democrats themselves even take issue with. You can't say, right, that you're for racial justice and you're for a progressive foreign policy when you're supporting Netanyahu's annexation of the Golan Heights. The issue of Israel and Palestine, and Engel specifically, we have to all come together and be clear that we are against settlements and against the occupation. And Eliot Engel has not been able to say that. As I said, his militaristic policies are really unbecoming of Democrats. And I think if we look at his issues with Ilhan Omar, I think that also speaks to the problem and the challenges that we're going to have in really dealing with this situation and dealing with this issue. Ilhan Omar spoke about the issue of lobbying, right? Lobbying around Israel, which AIPAC themselves have explicitly said they're lobbying on behalf of Israel. Look, there are many lobbying groups. It's not that AIPAC is special or different than there are Saudi lobbying groups as well. But when Ilhan Omar spoke about the pernicious influence of lobbying, right-wing smears tried to make it out that she was speaking about anti-Semitism and speaking that all Jewish people have a dual loyalty, which is not at all what she said. And then the fact that Eliot Engel is going to jump on this as a Democrat and push, right, this idea that Ilhan Omar was speaking an anti-Semitic slur really is a problem for us as Democrats. It really is a problem for us as we see how anti-Semitism has become a huge problem in Trumpian times, especially as we see as white supremacy is coming to the fore. We cannot have white supremacy, we cannot have anti-Semitism being weaponized in a way that is disingenuous to what is actually the real threat that's being present at this time. The real threat is white supremacy, the real threat is right-wing reactionary nationalism, and Eliot Engel, every time he puts Ilhan Omar in the camp of people who are killing people at synagogues, at mosques, at black churches, it does a disservice to what we're fighting. And it does a disservice to the right-wing reactionary nationalism that is really the ultimate threat that we have to recognize internationally. right, internationally. And so I say that we need to be honest about our democratic representation. We need to say that it's disingenuous if you're calling for a Green New Deal, but you're not challenging the environmental impacts of militarism. If you are voting for the NDAA, right, and voting for increased spending of $750 billion a year for war, for military spending, well, you also should understand that our 800 bases are polluting lands all across the world. Our military, right, and their gas-guzzling tanks and bombers are polluting around the world. Our Superfund sites are polluting rivers nationwide and internationally. And so you can't say that you're for the Green New Deal if you're not against militarism, if you're not against the military-industrial complex. It'd be callously disingenuous for you to say that you're for racial justice, right, when you support wars that kill black and brown people abroad. You can't talk about fully funding our public schools, right, when you don't actually value black and brown lives at home and abroad. And we've seen the problems with Elliot Engel with this because of all the money he has been taking from the military-industrial complex, from Lockheed Martin, from Boeing. He has an interest. He has an interest in these wars. And we have never seen him vote against a war because there's never been a war he doesn't like, because he is actually benefiting from these wars. The people who finance his campaigns are benefiting from his votes. And this is the problem with our democracy right now. And this is a representative, right, as me coming right here as a challenger, this is not the type of representative I will be, right? This is going to be a people-funded campaign, a people-powered campaign, and we are not taking corporate money. We are not taking money from any military lobby, from any healthcare lobby, or from any real estate group. And so look, I have some of my students here, and I can tell you, right now we're in Afghanistan for the 18th year. The people who are serving in Afghanistan, many of them were not even born when 9/11 happened. Think about that for a second. The people who are in Afghanistan serving cannot even remember 9/11. And for my students, this reality is clear. They have been at war for every year of my students' lives. My students face the threat of climate extinction. My students face the intractable reality of wage stagnation, income inequality, and college unaffordability. These are not the same threats that we had when I was in 9th grade at Fieldston. We've seen how much these threats have escalated. We've seen how white supremacy has made a comeback. Never thought I would say that. And so the urgency that we face was yesterday. There's no time for us to wait. We need change right now. And we need people who are unafraid to call out the problems as they see it. We need people who are unafraid to challenge U.S. empire. Because really that's what this comes down to. We have been an empire since day one. And our racist militarization abroad affects our racist militarization at home. You can't be against caging children at the U.S.-Texas border if you're not against caging children in Israel as well. You can't be against a militarized border if you're not against militarized borders all around the world. This has to do with U.S. empire and us reimagining who we are as a people. What does it mean to be American? What does it mean really for all of us to understand and respect our collective humanity? Even though we live still in segregated communities, I think now, because of Trump, we understand the real threat. And we understand that, especially at this moment, no more time can be wasted. We need to make this change now. So what I'm asking of all of you, so look into our campaign. Go onto our website, follow us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter. Challenging an incumbent is not easy. 90% to 95% of challengers to incumbents lose. But I just want to say very briefly, because I know I've been speaking for a bit of time, and I want to be able to maybe take some questions. There is no way we lose this, because the movement that we are building is about speaking truth to power and speaking of a truth that has been hidden in the American discourse for too long. It is about understanding what would America look like if we are not spending $800 billion a year financing wars to kill people abroad. It is about thinking what would our world look like if we are not giving $800 billion in fossil fuel subsidies to companies that are killing us? And so when we really imagine what that world is, when we see a diverse array of people here in Riverdale saying that this is something that we value, then look, even if Eliot Engel is in office next term, we don't lose because Eliot Engel has heard us, because America has heard us, and we've built a movement of people who have historically not been part of politics, who are saying they are not going to take this any longer. All right? So we cannot lose. We win no matter what. We win no matter what. But also, we're going to win. So check out the website, volunteer, and donate a few bucks if you can. Look, it's a tight space. What I was thinking was we could take a couple questions if there are questions, and then people could mingle, get some food. Yeah. That's everything we're doing is messing with big money. I'm here for it. Yeah. Look, I think that when we speak about prison in general, and I think even the campaign as a whole, I think that there are a lot of ideals and goals that we have that are maybe things that can't be accomplished tomorrow, but they're things that we have to hold as values that we're never going to sway away from and are not going to be negotiable. And I think, when it comes to making money off of detaining children, when it comes to making money off of disenfranchised people in prison, I think that these are things that they're not negotiable. And I think we have to hold the fact that, look, we need to totally reform how we're thinking about prison incarceration, right? We need to actually have decarceral and excarceral policies to support people while they're in prison and make it truly something that's rehabilitative and not punitive. And we have to think about policies when people get out of prison so they're able to actually be successful in society. But we're speaking about actually making it so that private prisons are no longer a thing in the country. I think that it really comes down to really just affirming the values and affirming the humanity of each person, and ultimately holding that as the ultimate goal. Protesting, showing up to each private prison, and making sure that any time a new prison is going to be built, that we hold local officials and we hold municipalities to that. I mentioned New York City was speaking about building an $11 billion. I think there were building 4 or 5 prisons in New York, $11 billion. We need to take them to task. We need to take them to task and make sure that while crime is decreasing, why are we constantly building more prisons? And why are we making them private prisons where people are profiting off it? We have to call out representatives locally, congressionally, all across the board. Yeah, so the question was about automation. It's a great question. I think in terms of thinking about how automation is frequently discussed in public discourse, I think there are 2 things that I'll focus on in the question. I think one, how we sort of demonize immigrants and think about the change in sort of manufacturing industries and service industries. We use it sort of as a xenophobic attack on people who are now who we say are taking those jobs, when really we have this issue of automation. So I think, speaking about automation, we also have to speak about really how xenophobia has been something that particularly people on the right have been using to speak about the change in job market over the last 20 years. But I also think that there's opportunity when understanding that jobs are always going to be changing as technology is changing, and this is something that, it's not even something that's cyclical, it's something that's going to be as forever as the wars that we've been in, sadly, And what we have to do is to think about that historically. I can think back to being in Yale, there being economists who say, look, unemployment is just, a fact of life. And really, unemployment controls inflation. It's what are you talking about? There's no reason for us to have a permanent 5 to 10% of people who are always unemployed because of this fear that there's going to be too much demand and then inflation is going to rise. Particularly as we're talking about changing the economy and thinking about a Green New Deal and transitioning to an economy that's actually going to be sustainable and suitable for all of us in this planet, right? We're going to be able to deal with automation because we have a hell of a lot of work to do to rebuild infrastructure, right? To rebuild public housing, right? And to actually properly fund public housing. We need people to do that, right? And it's not going to be done by robots. So when we speak about a federal job guarantee tied in to a Green New Deal, there are plenty of jobs for people. The problem is that we have allowed people to remain in poverty, and we don't see it as a vital interest because people lived off in their walled-off communities. They don't see the reality of what happens when people don't have jobs. Yeah, and we speak about this second grade class because in this second grade class we had a teacher who really just instilled in us a value which I carry with me today and the value that I'm going to be speaking about throughout this speech. In this second grade class, Mr. Rocco, she had us do this student cultural presentation. Everyone was required to do a student cultural presentation on their background. And so for my presentation, I was like, man, this is a great opportunity. I get to learn about my culture. I get to present it to the class. And initially, I didn't think it was necessarily going to be a life-changing thing. But now, 27 years later, it's something that I always come back to. There was one student named David. David, his mother came into the class, adorned in kente cloth, and told all the students about Kwanzaa. One of my Puerto Rican friends, her mother came in and brought the most delicious rice pudding. There were other kids who came in and their parents spoke about Italian astronomers. Other friends, they brought in Jamaican jerk chicken. And my mother, who's right here, she came in adorned in a natala and gold, traditional Eritrean attire. She brought in injera and shiro. And all of my classmates dined on our cultural food. And still to this day, my classmates, they always talk about this, oh my God, your mom's cooking, that day in second grade. And really, that just serves as a reminder of what opportunity for everyone to be able to understand that we are empowered by our difference, that we are strengthened by our empathy, and we each learned that we were going to be having a respect for collective humanity. In this moment, we were able to understand, right, that each of the differences we had was something that was going to guide us moving forward. So you can just bring over here. Throughout the last 50 years, to be honest. I think that you have to take this. I think that there are specific situations where you have to consider this question. Right? There's a question of military intervention for something like genocide, and then there's military intervention because, well, you know, the regime change that we've been seeing. I think when we look at the 9 overt wars that the U.S. is currently embroiled in, I think that we can actually say that the vast majority of these wars are wars that not only shouldn't have happened, but if they were going to happen, they should have been happening for congressional approval. So when it comes to war making, we need to actually take back that power and take it back in Congress. It should not be something that we can. It's not be something that just, you know, a president declares, oh, we're going to war, and yeah, this sort of connects with the authorization for use of military force from 9/11, which was 18 years ago. You know, we actually need to be able to have congressional oversight of these wars, right? We need to take back the war powers. I think the question of genocide is an important one, and I think it depends on specific situations. I think that there are a couple things that we need to think about in terms of U.S. foreign policy in general. First of all, I think that the UN and the Security Council needs to be totally reformed and democratized. I think that's a huge problem that we see right now when it comes to Security Council resolutions for wars and actually missions after wars. But look, you know, after 9/11, I think there's a compelling case for why one might say that we should go to war. I think the question ultimately, though, is how are we actually thinking about that war? Are we thinking about it as a 2001 authorization for use of military force, which now we're still citing that same authorization for wars now? I think that's a huge problem. So I can't answer it specifically depending on what's going on, but I think, look, I think there are potentially times for war, but I think the way we've been doing it for the last 20 years has been totally misguided.